Hi everyone and welcome to Deep Geek Live. Today we are going to be looking at Pippin, Peregrine Took, the youngest and possibly most fun member of the Fellowship. As always, what I will be doing with this is framing this around questions that I've got from my patrons. I will start off with a bit of an overview, just as a reminder of who he was and what he did during The Lord of the Rings. But first of all, there's just two things I want to just quickly bring to your attention before the first is a reminder, if you missed it, my second channel, IDG Live, is now live. You'll find a link down in the description. That's where I'm going to be moving all of my more live, more reactive kind of content. So over there you'll find interviews. I will move the live streams. They're staying here for the moment, but I will move the live streams over to there in a bit. Short form content, maybe a few other things as well. I've just now started doing the short form content over there. So if you like that kind of thing, do go and check it out, IDG Live. That's also now the short form stuff is on Instagram as well. Deep Geek Official, and it will soon be up on TikTok if you would like to go and find me there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I will go off a question from one of my patrons for this, which is 444, asking, what do you think are the rights that Warner Brothers bought? Only to the films or something more? What do you think they want to adapt? Except the War of the Rohirrim, and what do you think they should adapt? So this is news that Warner Brothers have announced they will be making several new Lord of the Rings films. Now, what does that mean? And I thought I would explain this first by looking at the rights. Who owns the rights to what? Although I should give a little clarification first of all. This is not remakes of the Peter Jackson films. That is pretty clear from everything I've heard, is that this is not carte blanche to go away and remake them. They have the rights to be making more things, different things. But let's look at the rights, because this is something I've said on many occasions, that nobody 100% seems to understand the rights to the situation. But it has been starting to become a bit clearer as we've been going through this. And I think the best way to understand it is by starting with when Tolkien himself was alive. This is going to be just like a 3-minute overview. If you're not interested in this or what this will mean in terms of what we're going to get over the next few years, because I think that is quite exciting, then just skip forward a few minutes. But the 3-minute version. When Tolkien was alive, obviously he held all the rights to all of his work. But as he grew older, he thought he wanted to make sure, and completely understandably, he wanted to make sure that he could look after his family after he was gone, and so his masterpiece could be bringing them income. He sold the rights for The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, the only two books within Middle-earth, within his legendarium, that were published by him during his lifetime. He sold the rights to them to be making films, all sorts of associated merchandising and other brand deals. That all went, and it ended up with this company called the Saul Zaentz Company, which they had a subsidiary, Middle-earth Enterprises, who then owned these rights in perpetuity. Now, the first thing to point out is that those were the rights to The Lord of the Rings, including the appendices, and The Hobbit, not Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, any of these other books which happened later. But those rights then resided there with Middle-earth Enterprises. They have since then, just last year, been sold on to a company called the Embracer Group, which is not a company I know very well. I believe they're from Sweden, but that's about it. Now, what did the Saul Zaentz Group, Middle-earth Enterprises, do with these rights? Well, they sold off. If you've ever seen any kind of official Lord of the Rings stuff out there, it's because they sold on the rights to be making things to someone else. So if you've ever played the tabletop war game by Games Workshop, they got the rights from there. If you've ever played tabletop role-playing game, Middle-earth, MERP, then that they got from there. If you've ever bought any official merch, the Lego stuff, they got the rights came from there as well. And of course, they gave the rights to Warner Brothers, New Line Cinema, to be making the Lord of the Rings films and the Hobbit films. And that's roughly, pardon me, roughly where we were for quite some time. There was a little bit, you may or may not remember, but there was a little bit of uncertainty a few weeks ago when Embracer was saying, this new owner of the rights was saying that the rights effectively had lapsed. Warner Brothers had not been making new films, and therefore the rights had lapsed and come back to Embracer. They seem to have sorted all of this out. So that's the situation. Then there was a very complicated process which made it become available, but the rights to make TV shows became available. Again, this is just for the Lord of the Rings and Appendices and the Hobbit. That's what Amazon bought. That is what led to the Rings of Power. So we now have the current situation that we have. The Tolkien estate retains rights to everything to do with the Silmarillion Unfinished Tales. They have never given full adaptation rights to anyone for that. They do occasionally give ad hoc permissions to use certain things, but if something is only in those books, it is not allowed. The rights to make films is now and remains with Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema. This is Peter Jackson who is very much involved in this still. So this is a clarification. An agreement was made with Embracer that Warner Brothers will be making more Lord of the Rings films. We know one already. The War of the Rohirrim was announced. They are making that. That is an anime movie which is coming out next year. This is based on a story from the history of Rohan. But they will be making more films. What are they going to be? We do not know yet. Nobody knows yet. They haven't decided this yet, so this is just speculation. But it has to be, first of all, not a remake. Second of all, it's very clear, Embracer have made it clear that they are looking for there not to be duplication. That so if Amazon have been making Rings of Power, we're not expecting Warner Brothers to be making their own version of the Second Age history. So we're not expecting that kind of duplication, which still leaves quite a lot, mostly from the appendices from the Lord of the Rings. So if you're looking for something that will probably be turned into a film, look into the appendices to the Lord of the Rings, which is sort of a squashed down version of the Silmarillion. Might we see something along the lines of what we had rumored of the early life of Aragorn? I think that's entirely possible. Might we see something to do with the wars in Angmar, perhaps Gondor history? I think these are the kinds of things we probably should be expecting. So that's roughly where they are. I would quite like something. I mean, the wars of Angmar and Arnor would be fantastic. I know a lot of people weren't certain about this. I think there is enough there for a reasonable mini-series or film about Aragorn when he was younger. So that's what we've got going on. If you're wondering about merch, again, this is complicated, but because Amazon own the rights to TV adaptation and Embracer own the rights overall to the merch, they have to come to an agreement. This is why we've not seen any Rings of Power merch so far, because they just simply have not come to an agreement on doing the merch. So added to all of this, Embracer have given out the right to be making a lot of video games as well. Expect 3 or 4, I think we were told, over the course of the next few years. We know a couple of them. One of them is about Casa Doom. We've got the Gollum game coming out soon. And then we've got a couple more we do not know. So what does this all mean? Well, the rights issues are still up in the air. People are still negotiating stuff. It's still not beyond the realms of possibility that the Tolkien estate may decide to cash in to take the money for the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, but who knows? And if they don't, even if that is the case, Warner Brothers have clearly committed to be making several Lord of the Rings films, Middle-earth films. Amazon have the right to make not just the Rings of Power. I fully expect that to do the full 5 seasons, by the way, but also they hold the rights to make other TV shows. Will they do that? I don't know. I thought it was about 50-50 before. I think it's probably still about 50-50 on their own terms. I think they think that Rings of Power is a success, but I think that they will now be quite wary of there being too much Lord of the Rings out there. So we should expect several new films. We should expect Rings of Power to keep going. We should expect lots of new video games. There is a lot going on, and there might be even more. This is one of the biggest potential intellectual properties out there. And when you see what Disney have done with something like Star Wars or with Marvel, that is the idea that's in people's heads. So we can turn this into something which was even bigger than it already is. I'll just go through, answer a few quick questions in the chat. But I should probably just say, quick hat tip: Fellowship of Fans on Twitter. If you don't follow them, if you are on Twitter, you don't follow them, you really should. They know all of the inside gossip on this. So do go. They've recently been answering a whole load of questions on this very nice issue. So if you want more information, do go there. Alan Quinn's saying, what about the rights to Brennan and Luthien? That story has been told or mentioned multiple times in several books. Yeah, the overall story itself remains, as I understand it, with the Tolkien estate. However, there are references to it, as you've said, in the Lord of the Rings itself, I think in the appendices. So could someone do something? Yes. But as it stands, if something is only mentioned in the Silmarillion, as large parts of that story are, then somebody would not have, neither Warner Brothers nor Amazon would have the rights to adapt it. So as an example, The Mariner's Wife is a story which is an unfinished tales. This is a great story from the Second Age. Amazon do not have the rights to that. So even though they're doing a Second Age show, they do not have the rights to do the only almost complete story that Tolkien wrote in the Second Age. That's where we're at. They can reference a couple of the characters because they get referenced in the appendices to the Lord of the Rings, but they will not be able to do the whole story. So that will be the same with Beren and Luthien. Matthew Stewart saying, I'd love to see more of the weird of Middle-earth, strange and almost horror-type beasts and characters, werewolves, vampires, and nameless things. Yeah, absolutely, that'd be fantastic. Although, again, a lot of that is just in the Silmarillion and the wider background books edited by Christopher Tolkien. Just having a quick flick through, see if anyone... The Adventures of Young Smeagol, Matt McCartney says no, but I could see a Gollum thing is possible. Matthew Stewart saying, I want to see the conflict in the north of the Angmar Wars. Yeah, that would be great. And let's just go through... Matt McCartney saying, I currently hold the rights to make a Build a Pony musical. Stay tuned. There is a news, I haven't digested it all, but there is going to be a Lord of the Rings musical adapted, which is going to happen this summer. So take a look at that. I will tweet that out afterwards. Alana Prestane of Bravo saying, what's this about a Gollum game? Love your show, by the way. Yeah, so this is a game that it's a proper full video game. It's not just an app game, and it looks, there is a trailer for it, incidentally. It's just a short trailer, but there is a trailer out there. If you Google it, Gollum video game, I suspect will probably bring it up. I'm sure one of the moderators will be able to put it in the chat. It looks very good. It is, the idea is that this is getting closer to what I would love as a video game, which is an open world Middle-earth video game. I don't think at the moment we've got anything which is like that, but this is the idea. This is around the time when Gollum has lost the ring and he's heading into and out of Mordor. So it was delayed Not 100% sure of the reasons why. It was due to come out last year. They're originally thinking to tie this in, the timing-wise, with the Rings of Power, but didn't, and it's still not come out. But I think the plan is for it to come out in a few months' time. Martin S saying, good evening. Which army would be strongest, 6,000 Vanyar or 10,000 Woodland Realm elves from the third age? 6,000 Vanyar. I think that's pretty. So elves that have been in Valinor are basically superpowered. And the way that Tolkien writes it in the Silmarillion is when the Noldor came across, when they first came across and were about to from Valinor and were going to take on Morgoth, they actually had a chance because the light of the two trees was in them still. And that seemed to sort of fade over time. But if they just kept a little bit of discipline, this is all on Feanor, but if they kept a little bit of discipline, they actually had a chance. Tater Nuts saying, no question, just take my money and keep up the great work. Well, that's very kind. Thank you very much for that. Let's have a quick flick through. Andrew K saying, thanks for the update. New Line, Warner Media, Lord of the Rings rumblings were very much on my mind. Yeah, I think, and yours and mine both. A few people talking about oversaturation. I mean, I think it's a concern. But the way I view it, as a Lord of the Rings fan, I will watch all of this, and I think the more things there are, the more chances we have of something which is absolutely golden. I think the fact that Peter Jackson and co. Philippa Boyens, Fran Walsh are still involved in this, Warner Brothers have been keeping them involved, means that I think we've got a chance of getting something which retains the feel of the original Lord of the Rings films. So I'm hopeful. We obviously don't know any details yet. It's far too early to come to any conclusions on the quality of anything. But for me, more Tolkien adaptations is better. There are some that I don't like, then I just won't watch them again. It's as simple as that. Right, let's go to actually, Lucian, really, before I go this, Lucian saying, I'd love to see a dark take on Tolkien's unfinished sequel released as a film, preferably with Peter Jackson on board and a fresh start. Yes, so for those who don't know, I did a video on this ages ago, one of my best performing videos, actually. Tolkien started writing a sequel to Lord of the Rings, and he tried to write it 3 times. He only ever got as far as 13 pages. And it was going to be dark. The New Shadow. This was set well after Aragorn's time. You get everybody has now grown used to peace. The orcs have gone, so this kind of the idea of this great evil, which had been hanging over the land for all that time, had just started to become something people laugh at. But there was basically, as far as we can see, evil cults were starting to arise once more in Gondor. And you get this character, the main character we just get introduced to is a very old man, and he meets somebody who basically says, hey, do you want to come along to one of these secret cult meetings? Doesn't say it quite like that. Obviously, Tolkien was a better writer than that. Wear black and meet me after midnight kind of thing. And this guy then goes into his house and he smelled something. This is pretty much the last words we get. He smelled something long forgotten. It was the smell of evil. And that was the point at which Tolkien stopped writing. And he explained why later. And he basically said that it just didn't interest him anymore, because this was just like the way that he put it, a modern thriller. This is just like all darkness and gloom, and he didn't want that. He wanted light and hope. Yes, there has to be darkness, but he wanted the light and hope. So do go check out that video. I can't even remember Tolkien's unfinished sequel to the Lord of the Rings. Perhaps it was called something like that. If you've not come across this before, it's a fascinating thing, and we do have Tolkien himself writing about why he didn't carry on with it. So would I want that? I don't know. I think I quite like the idea that because Tolkien himself explicitly decided he didn't wish to go ahead with it, I'm personally happy to leave that be. So yeah, personally, I think I wouldn't. Tulka saying Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens are still in the loop. They get informed on Warner Brothers' progress on Tolkien. Philippa Boyens, incidentally, is involved in, I think, is exec producing the War of the Rohirrim, which is coming out next year. Okay, let's. With that, I said it was only going to be 5 minutes. We've gone on for 20 minutes. So apologies for that. But let's get into talk about Pippin. Maybe if there is interest in this, maybe I'll do a separate thing about who owns the rights and what to expect. Maybe I'll get someone on and have to do a little sort of interview on my second channel, something like that. Okay, let's talk about Pippin, though. So Pippin is, as we know, he's the youngest member of the Fellowship, and he was at the start of the Fellowship. He was, I think, 27, 28 years old. Now, hobbits live a little bit longer than humans on our planet, at least, and as a result, hobbits tend their sort of come of age at 33. So we have to keep in mind all the way through this that Pippin is actually effectively a teenager in hobbit terms, and so when he's going off and doing stupid things and saying stupid things, putting his foot in it, he's a teenager. He's not, as a hobbit, he's not fully grown up, which incidentally also means we get these ideas from the films, and sometimes the films had to take slight shortcuts. They did a bit of a mini time contraction right at the beginning of those films. There is a big gap, a 16-year gap between when we get Bilbo's party and when the start of the real action, when Frodo's going to go off and leave the Shire. Which means that although, yes, Merry and Pippin were at Bilbo's party, Merry was only 11 at the time, so he wasn't there doing all the pranks with the fireworks. And the other thing which is changed, and I think this is actually quite an important shift, is the fact that in the books, we don't just get Frodo and Sam heading off on their own, and then Merry and Pippin literally just bumping into them en route. That's not what happened in the book. In the book, Sam basically tells Merry and Pippin what's going on beforehand, and they form the conspirators, they call themselves. There are those ones, a couple of Frederick Bolger as well is involved, and they all decide, Frodo's friends, we're not going to let him just head off on his own out into the wilderness. We'll go. So Merry does go off to Crick Hollow to prepare the way there, but Pippin stays with Frodo and Sam, and Pippin is with them as they're doing their walk across the Shire. And so Pippin is the one who originally, and he comes across actually quite well to start with. Pippin, as going across the Shire, he's the one who is there suggesting they meet up with Farmer Maggot, who in the books is a fantastic character. He is there when they end up going into the old forest. He's the person who first just is like, this is not really right, there's something wrong in this forest. So he actually comes across quite well. But by the time they get up to Bree, and it's the 4 hobbits, they've left Frederick Bolger in Crick Hollow, holding the fort there, which was a brave thing in and of itself. Hat tip to him, Fatty Bolger, as they call him. He is an unsung hero of this story. He faces down the Black Riders, and he doesn't go on the journey with everyone else, but he plays his part. Anyway, the 4 hobbits reach the Prancing Pony, and this is when Pippin's habit of saying and doing the wrong thing just starts to show itself. He has a few drinks in the Prancing Pony, and he starts telling the story about Bilbo and his vanishing trick at his party. And that's probably not the wisest thing to be doing when there could well be spies around. There were spies around. And that's what prompted Frodo to try and distract attention away from that by singing his song. But then he slipped and the ring went on his finger and he disappeared and actually made everything a whole lot worse. This, though, prompts Aragorn to make contact and they manage to escape safely. By the time they get to Rivendell, they've been through quite a lot. They understand a lot more about the real danger that they're facing, but they're not invited to the Council of Elrond. This is just for the great and the powerful and the mighty to be discussing what to do. Sam is there, but he shouldn't be there. And when they emerge after the Council of Elrond, it's not, again, the films contract things a little bit for understandable reasons, and they sort of show you have the council, everybody chats, and at the end of it, these 9 people are all stood there. That's not what happened in the book. In the book, at the end of the actual council, Frodo, it has been agreed, will take the ring. It's been agreed Sam is going to go with him, but that's it. Then Elrond sends out spies, scouts off to try and figure out what's going on. Where are the Black Riders? What's happened to Radagast? That kind of thing. It's only when they come back that they then start to go, okay, well, who else is going to go with Frodo? And Elrond, the conclusion, well, we should have a dwarf, we should have an elf, we should have a human, and Boromir should come along as well because, it's en route. And he wanted 9 to match up with the 9 Nazgul, and he was pondering who should I take? Who of the wise among the people of Rivendell should go with them? And I won't get into this in too much detail because I've got a specific question about it later. But Gandalf then pushes back and says, "Well, how about these 2?" Because they were desperate to go, Merry and Pippin, and Elrond eventually agrees. So they join the party. Head off. The next time that we really see Pippin make an impact is not outside the gates of Moria. Yes, he sort of says something which annoys Gandalf, but it's not him who rouses the Watcher in the water by throwing something there. That was Boromir, incidentally. But when they get in, it is him dropping a pebble down the well, which starts the drums in. Now, what's the outcome of that? In real practical terms, it's the loss of Gandalf. They escape, they go out to Lothlorien, and following on from that, down to the point where they have to make a decision. Are they going to go east towards Mordor, or are they going to head off down towards Minas Tirith? Now, that's when Boromir tries to take the ring from Frodo. The moment that Merry and Pippin discover this, that is when they start charging off, desperately trying to find Frodo, which says a huge amounts about their character, both of them, that they care more for Frodo than themselves. They're basically thought there might be orcs running around here. They don't care. They're going to try and find Frodo. But Boromir finds them, defends them for a while, dies valiantly. And then we get another moment when Pippin shows his worth. Because it is him, if you remember that they knew, Aragorn and co knew that they were on the right track because they saw one of those brooches, badges that they got from Lothlorien. Not likely do the leaves of Lorien fall. That was Pippin, who thought, you know what, I'll do this. I'll drop that on the floor so that if anyone's following, they will see it. He was also the person who figured out about slipping out of his bonds and with Merry getting into Fangorn. They meet Treebeard and talk him round. And this is, I think, we kind of can gloss over that quite a lot. The Ents had not marched for so long. This has been centuries since they'd been largely even moving, most of them. And yet, within a few short days, Merry and Pippin arriving, they managed to persuade the Ents to go and march on Isengard, which is an astonishing feat. So already we're seeing Pippin in particular, but also with Merry, having this huge impact on the story. But then, of course, we get this next moment when he does a thing which perhaps is a little fool of a tookish. The Palantir, Saruman being defeated, the Grima throws the Palantir down onto the ground, and Pippin sees it, and then he steals it later and looks into it and sees Sauron. Gandalf rescues him. But this is hugely important because from that, Sauron decided that he sees a hobbit. He decides this must be the ring bearer. He sees this is in Isengard. It must be with Saruman. He changes all of his focus. He changes all of what he's doing. He speeds up the whole process of attacking. And Gandalf decides he has to protect Pippin. He takes Pippin with him down to Minas Tirith. That is quite a turning point, I personally think, for Pippin, because on that journey, it's quite quick. They're on Shadowfax, but he gets a lot of answers from Gandalf. He hears what's going on. He has seen Sauron. So again, I've got a question about this. I won't get into it too much right now, but that has to have an impact on him to experience seeing that evil. And by the time he reaches Minas Tirith and he finds Denethor, talks to Denethor, he has to explain to him how Denethor's son, oldest son, had died saving him, a hobbit. And Pippin seems to suddenly get all serious in a way. He's like, you know what, your son died for me. I hereby give you my service. I will now, from now on, be in your service. Which is that I dedicate my life to serving you, which is a huge shift. He has clearly been impacted by what's just been happening to him. And then we get the heroism again. He, when Denethor goes a little bit crazy, he's the person who goes and gets Gandalf and he saves Faramir's life. He discovers Merry on the streets and helps bring him back to where, because Merry had been wounded, effectively, so the Black Breath knocked out by the Nazgul. He brings him to somewhere where he can be healed. He's really heroic in a kind of not actually on the battlefield way. And then he joins the final march on Mordor, where in the final battle he kills a troll, which is just ridiculous when you think about it. He's just this tiny little hobbit, but he kills a troll. It kind of goes unnoticed because of what Merry did with the Witch King, but this is pretty heroic stuff. And then at the very end, they head back to the Shire, and we know that Saruman is there, but Gandalf probably suspects some bad things, but says, you know what? You've all grown up enough now. You can sort this out. And I think that he was not just talking to Frodo and Sam, who didn't do so much in the Scour of the Shire. This was Merry and Pippin. And sure enough, Merry and Pippin led the resistance against Saruman and helped save the Shire at the end of it. So that's Merry's character arc as it is. Out of the hobbits, he's the one who grows the most. He starts off as being this he's always teasing Frodo, he's joking, he doesn't take things quite as seriously, he doesn't think about what he's doing so much, but by the end of it, he's leading an army, literally leading an army in the Shire. He's killing trolls. He pledged his service to Gondor. He's taking some very serious decisions. So his character growth is the most. I would personally argue Merry does grow as well as a character, literally as well as figuratively. Sam doesn't so much. He's very steady all the way through. and Frodo just gets worn down by it. But Pippin starts off as this sort of teenager, not really understanding everything that he's going out to face, not taking everything seriously. But by the end, he's clearly a grown man or grown hobbit. Okay, so that's my overview of Pippin. Let's have a quick look. Martin S saying, who do you think is the best elf in the Third Age Middle-earth overall? I'm thinking Galadriel is the greatest, but she did want the ring for a long time. Elrond had no such flaw that we know of, so my vote would go to him. I mean, I'd go with Glorfindel on this one. I don't know if the best is the right word, but he comes across as being pretty angelic. Galadriel, greatest and most powerful, perhaps, particularly as she had the Ring of Power. But yeah, she had a lot of character growth to happen during the Third Age. Kaziglu Bay asking, Pippin versus Tyrion Lannister versus Willow in a fist fight. Who wins? I mean, asking important questions here. I would go with either Tyrion or later Pippin. Tyrion knows how to survive from quite early on in the books. Pippin, it takes him a little while. And Lanquin saying honourable mention to Círdan. So yeah, on the elves, then definitely I would go with that. He's got an honourable mention. Brothers Crin saying Pippin would win. Yeah, I mean later Pippin, perhaps not early Pippin. Let's go to a question from Matthew Hawkins. This is one of the questions that I said I had coming up. Do you think Pippin was changed long term in any way following his one-to-one with Sauron using the Palantiri? In Dungeons and Dragons terms, he must have gained a few experience points. Well, yeah, absolutely, he will have gained a few experience points. For me, this is the turning point for him. He does great things beforehand, but they're always interspersed with him not understanding the gravity of the situation. The dropping a stone down the well in Moria, he just doesn't seem to think about it. The picking up the Palantir, he doesn't. It's yes, he seems to have been overtaken by a little bit of the power of the Palantir itself, but he doesn't think through all of the implications of this. After this, he takes things so much more seriously. He seems to have been really shaken by it. He's asking the right questions of Gandalf. He seems genuinely scared and concerned about what's happening. He has seen the face of evil. So that's why I think it's important that after Gandalf, when the first person that he properly meets is Denethor, and he suddenly it's almost as if something clicks in his mind, because all the way through after I mean, I think they mentioned Boromir a couple of times, Merry and Pippin, but it's certainly not their main topic of conversation. But when he gets to Denethor, Pippin's thought is, that guy saved my life. He gave up his life for me. I can see how much his father loved him. I owe something here. And that is a huge maturing. When you get him making other kind of brave, honourable-ish decisions, say at the Council of Elrond afterwards, when he and Merry were wanting to join the party, it was like, I'm coming anyway. Doesn't matter if you pick me or not. I'm just going to follow you. It was almost petulant. It was very teenage. Here, this was a clearly thought through. I know what this means. I understand what this means. I'm sacrificing the rest of my life to serve Denethor because his son died trying to save me. And from that moment on, he does seem to have grown. He makes a huge contribution during the attack on Minas Tirith, saving Faramir's life. He makes a great contribution to killing the troll. He literally is leading an army. He brought 100 people from Tookland. He brought them across over to fight in the scouring of the Shire, and he led them. So that's the moment, I think, that he shifted and he started taking things seriously. And of course, he ends up, after all this, he ends up as Thane of the Shire, which it's elected post, but the fact that he takes this on, and as far as we can tell, takes the role seriously, I think is quite the credit to him. Let's get to a question from Tantalus, saying, how do you think removing the scouring affected Pippin's story arc? The movies seem to miss his maturity at the end of the books, reflecting the death of innocence in war and leadership through adversity. Yeah, I agree. I understand with the films why they contracted some things, why they chopped some things out. I completely get it. It's a different art form, cinema compared to reading a book. But that comes with some implications for the character. And I think actually the two biggest things for Pippin were at the beginning and the end. I really disliked the fact that Merry and Pippin only ended up on this adventure because they randomly stumbled into them. If you remember in the films, they were there scrumping some carrots and they literally fell out of a field onto Frodo and Sam. And that's the reason why they were part of the gang. And that takes away all volition from them. Whereas because in the books, Sam had told them what was going on, and they decided that they wanted to join this. It wasn't just they, by accident, happened to be a part of this. They actively decided they wanted to be a part of this. And then at the end, taking out the scouring of the Shire, it does show that the scouring of the Shire shows how he has grown, how he has changed. Yes, I made quite a lot of the fact that he killed a troll, but we don't get the impression that this was him suddenly he's learned how to be an amazing fighter, and from that moment on he's better at fighting. That was a lucky hit. It was brave, but it was a lucky hit. And the scouring of the Shire shows what all of the characters are like. It shows where they have come, what the journey has meant, and it gives them the opportunity to retake the Shire. Because, and I might wax lyrical about this for a little bit longer, George R. R. Martin, incidentally, sort of crossed back over very briefly into Song of Ice and Fire. He says every time he reads the scouring of the Shire, he realizes even more how brilliant it is. He thinks it's astonishing. He thinks it's an amazing bit of writing. And I think I feel the same, is that every time I come back to it, I understand a little bit more. Because for Tolkien, it's not just this, the heroes win the day and everything is perfect and great and wonderful and they can go home and it's as it was before. It is not as it was before. It cannot ever be as it was before, because war, death, destruction, you can't just forget it, move on and live happy lives. It's not the same. And this comes from him. This will come from him and his understanding, having been to war himself in the First World War. And he came back and things were not the same. He writes passionately about, and really sadly, I say passionately, actually, he writes very kind of factually, but you can hear the pain between his words. When he came back from war, he says, almost all of my closest friends were dead. And that's a horrific thing to read. It must be a horrific thing to live through. And that's his understanding that he brought into this. When you come home, things are not the same. Even if you've gone away and been heroic, when you come home, things are not the same. It was not the same for Merry and Pippin. It was not the same for Frodo, who he could not enjoy the fruits of all of his great labours. It was not the same for Sam. Sam had the happiest of the endings, but even he had to put in a lot of work planting seeds all across the Shire just to get it back to where it was before. So, yes, the scouring of the Shire is really thematically important to understanding the how Tolkien's worldview is shown through the Lord of the Rings. Um, and in particular with Pippin, because Pippin leaves as the person who's always joking around, always teasing people, maybe not taking things as seriously. He comes back and he gathers an army and he wins a war. And that's him. He's not just there uh, joining in somebody else's war, he's the person leading it. Um, Question Martin S. What did the Ent drafts do to Pippin and Merry? Did it increase their physical strength slightly? Yes, so they grew, is what we're told. They grew taller. They were taller even than Bulrora Took, who was the biggest and tallest of the um, hobbits. And so when they came back, they were head and shoulders literally above everyone else. And I think the implication is that, yes, they became stronger. Um, there's not really much of a hint that they sort of become more entish or anything like that, but they grow and they do become stronger. And I guess you could probably say it helps both of them sort of grow up a little bit, but not just figuratively as well as literally, I would say. Let's go to Brother Scrin. Hi there, by the way. Great to see you there in the chat. Let's go to a question from Martin Sjöstrand. I might ask one question. Do you think he would have made a good bearer of the One Ring? What about Merry? And Martin adds his own guesswork. He's saying, I think it's fairly well established. The idea is that the hobbits in general make relatively decent bearers of the One Ring because they have little power, personal or political, and small aspirations for getting more power. Perhaps Bilbo was the ideal bearer. He managed, with some insistence from Gandalf, to leave it to Frodo after having had it for several decades. Frodo and Sam were very good bearers too. Merry and Pippin, my guess, would be worse than the three hobbits above, but better than most people. I would love to know what you think in the chat. I will read out a few answers if you want to drop that, how you think Pippin would have been as the ring bearer. My take is quite similar, I think, to Martin's. Is that the One Ring? Its power came from the greed for power in the bearer. That's how it gained its hold over somebody. So you see, with Boromir, his temptation was if he had it, then he would defend cities and defeat evil. When you get Galadriel, who had great power and potential aspirations for even more power, she was there being, I would be a Dark Lord of all the Middle Earth, effectively. That's what, or Dark Lady. That's what her aspirations were. Sam, rather wonderfully, when he has the ring briefly, he starts getting these visions of being the greatest gardener in all of the Shire. So it's a matter of where your different levels of aspiration are. Bilbo seems not to have been hugely effective with it. I'd say yes, Bilbo is astonishing. This person who actually gave up the One Ring. He required prompting. It took a lot of work, but he did give up the One Ring in a way that Frodo eventually couldn't. But Frodo was perfect for it. Frodo managed to do what he needed to do. I agree. Sam would have also done a very good job. Whether he would have managed to get the last few steps, I guess we'll never know. Merry and Pippin, I think that they were also absent. They are very selfless. When you read about their reasons for wanting to go on with Frodo, it's it's not that they don't think it's going to be dangerous or hard work. It's just that they think that they have to be there for their friends. They think that it will be bad for them personally, but they have to be with Frodo. They have to support Frodo. This is selfless. Pippin giving over his service to Denethor was selfless. Him running around trying desperately to get Gandalf to save Faramir was, in a way, also a selfless act. The things that he does that he gets wrong, they're not about him wanting extra power. They're just him being a bit bored or a bit inquisitive. So I think he would have been pretty good. Maybe not as strong as Bilbo and Frodo were with it, but yeah, I think he'd be pretty good. Um, uh, just have a quick flick in the chat. Green Dragon reprised saying the One Ring would have been too much of a temptation for Pippin. He couldn't resist a Palantir. I think that's a really good point. The Kazuku Bay saying if Pippin had the ring, he would make sure there was a second breakfast. He absolutely would. Carl Karsnark saying Pippin ends up taller than Bull Roarer took himself. Fun fact, a Bull Roarer is a type of Roman war horn that looked like a skinny sousaphone and was originally called a rhombus. That is a fun fact. Wow, I have some very knowledgeable people in the chat today. Is there Ahmed saying, I don't know anything about the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, but I'm here as your streams are great and the friends I've made in the chat. Well, that makes me very happy. It's if you're watching live, being in the chat is a very different experience. So that makes me very pleased. Ramon Cavalcanti saying, I always imagine that the fact of starting a journey to try to destroy the ring puts Frodo and Sam in a more serious situation for the level of temptation of the ring in relation to Bilbo. Yes, I think I would agree with that. Let's go to a question from Jules Holman or Halman. What do you think of how Pippin is in the films compared to the books? What do you make of Billy Boyd's portrayal? I personally really like it. He makes me laugh. Yeah, someone else was asking about yes, Sine Jensen. I hope I pronounced that correctly this time. Saying thanks for the great content. Congrats on the new channel. Can't wait to follow. I'm curious as to how you think Pippin is different in the films versus the books. Personally, I tend to see them as a pair of sorts, but I do think they have more individual personality in the books. Yeah, so a little bit about the books versus films. First of all, yeah, I love Billy Boyd. I think he did an excellent job. I think the entire cast is, I'm not original in saying it, but it was such a wonderfully cast set of films. The Lord of the Rings, I think, did a fantastic job. I've mentioned a couple of changes which prevented showing the extent of Pippin's character journey, being the fact that Pippin in the books chose to go with Frodo to start with, rather than just happened upon the adventure, and at the very end, the Scouring of the Shire showed the change that had happened to him. So without that, I think that the Pippin's character journey is a lot more limited on the show. He doesn't grow as much. One thing I think they did do, Peter Jackson was seemingly very keen to make sure that there was humor in the films, which I think did work really well. I was less convinced by the need for Gimli to be a comical character, but Merry and Pippin as a kind of a comedic double act worked particularly well, I thought. Pippin can be a funny character in the books, but they played it up a lot more on the in the movies. So I think there's that. There's the fact that he is younger on the in the books is another element that is different. and that is emphasized a few different times. He, in fact, when they get to the aftermath of the Council of Elrond, and Elrond is deciding who's going to go along, and Gandalf says, well, we could take these two hobbits. And one of the things that Elrond says, well, maybe the older hobbit, Merry, but I was thinking maybe not the younger one. Maybe Pippin is a bit too young. We'll send him off back to the Shire to warn people that there's some bad stuff going on. So this isn't, the difference in age is emphasized a lot more in the books, and so that again plays into this character arc, where he started as effectively a hobbit teenager to where he ended. This is, if you just took Pippin's story, it is a coming of age story. This is a story where he grows up into being a hobbit man, rather than just being a sort of a teenager, and not taking everything so seriously. So I didn't mind the changes, I think is what I'm saying. I didn't mind the changes in the films. I think it did curtail his character arc, but I think that I understood why, and I think that the comedic elements came through particularly well. Let's go to question from Maura Lee. Just a show of love and support. You're the best. Thank you so much, Maura. You know, I really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. That's incredibly generous of you. And also saying for the Entwives. Absolutely, yes. So this is one of the things Treebid does ask, are the Entwives possibly in the Shire? Which, if you saw my Entwives video from ages ago, you'll know my answer to that. But it is noticeable that one of the conversations that Sam is sort of on the peripheral of down the pub in the Shire is this idea that maybe there are some trees that walk around the edges of the Shire in the North Downs. So it's not as fanciful an idea as you might think. Martin S. saying, on a dark and serious note, I have thought about Nazgul on their fell beasts attacking from above, and the plight of a soldier being bombed from an airplane. Death from above is one that one is sadly rather defenseless against. Yeah, so this is one of those things that Tolkien did very much, I think, become aware of. Obviously, during his lifetime, planes will have become more and more of a thing. In the First World War, there were planes, but they didn't play as big a role as they did in, say, the Second World War, when he will definitely have been affected by things like the Blitz. So with Lord of the Rings being written largely on the other side of the Second World War, that will very much have been quite fresh in his mind, this idea of the importance of air superiority, I think we'd probably call it these days. And so whereas the Eagles were introduced early on, I think the idea that you have like this opposing force to the Eagles, being the fell beasts, makes this feel more of a battle, and it actually takes away a little bit of the idea with the Eagles that maybe they're a bit of an unfair advantage. Danny Ferguson in the chat saying hobbits are generally seen as children both in mind and spirit. I think yes, certainly they played up on this on the films. When Boromir was playing with Merry and Pippin, for example, it was very much the image of like a father playing with his children, that kind of thing. And people do tend to treat them more like that. But I think Tolkien showed the wise were not treating them like that. Certainly Elrond didn't. Gandalf didn't. Aragorn didn't treated them with great respect. And when you get someone like Bilbo, the respect that is there within Rivendell for Bilbo is really quite palpable. So yeah, I think that Tolkien was aware of the fact that we as readers might see them as more childlike, but I think he showed the range of reactions from people to that to try and balance it. Andrew Kay saying, especially looking back from this current climate of long-form series or storytelling, been making me appreciate how much development on many levels and how satisfying Peter Jackson's films are. Yes, they absolutely are. I mean, if you watch them back to back, the extended versions, which obviously I have, then it is a full day. It's a good 12 plus hours to watch all three of them, which is, in today's terms, a bit more than a whole series of a TV show, a sort of a 10 episode TV show. So that's the kind of character arcs that we might expect to see there, and we do achieve it, but with a huge cast, a massive cast of characters. The work. I mean, I often point out the differences between the books and the films, but the work that went into making the story, in my view, the story in the book work on a different level than on a film, I think was magnificent. Charis Ballerina, interesting question. How long do you think it would have taken Bilbo to go full Gollum had he kept the ring? Well, I mean, he had it for a goodly long time, a good half century or so, or more. So, would he have gone full Gollum? I think it's taken him longer than Gollum, because Gollum, as Gandalf himself basically speculated, he started out with evil in his heart. His first act was killing someone to get the ring, and he got driven out from his home because of this and because of who he had become. Bilbo didn't. We don't see those changes in Bilbo. We do see that one time when he's there, after all, why shouldn't I keep it? That kind of moment, it clearly has had an impact on him. But would it have turned him into someone who becomes so obsessed? Yes, in time, it would have done. Absolutely. But a slower process than with Gollum. Gollum had it for 500 odd years. But it seems to have had a hold on him from very, very early on. Let's go to a question from the King's Road. G'day, Robert. G'day. Can you please talk about what purpose J.R.R. Tolkien intended Pippin to serve thematically? Tolkien's deep love of the peaceful, simple agrarian lifestyle which we see through characters like Tom Bombadil and Radagast. Do you think he used Pippin to convey something in this way, perhaps his appreciation for innocence or joyous people? Also, sending my best to the fantastic moderation team from sunny Queensland in Australia. Cheers, and here's to all the rest of it. Well, this is a great moment for me to say, if you are watching this live, can you please give a little bit of love, a little bit of appreciation to the moderators who do a fantastic job making sure that the live chat is safe for everyone. So if you could just show them a bit of love, I would hugely appreciate it. And also, while I'm thinking about it, patrons, thank you. Cannot do what I do without you. So this is my heartfelt thanks to you. If you would like to support this channel, the best way to do that is through Patreon. There's a link in the description. But in terms of what is his the thematic point of Pippin is, I think you're right. It's and the hobbits as a whole show this the importance of simplicity and the importance of enjoying life. Now, the characters like you mentioned too, Tom Bombadil and Radagast, we don't actually see all that much of Radagast. He's very present in our minds because of the Hobbit films, but we only really see him here in Gandalf's memories of just like a meeting. So he's not that in the story. Tom Bombadil is big for a short period of time, but he's not leaving where he is. So if Tolkien wished to show this happy, simple life, then through the story, then he had to have some characters who represent that come out from the Shire. Frodo does, but the further into the story he gets, the closer to Mordor he gets, the more beaten down by the story he is, more pressed, more determined. The courage and determination remains there, but he's not exactly a vibrant, uplifting character by the end. Sam retains this love and care and so many wonderful characteristics, but he doesn't and can't, because of he spends half the story in and around Mordor. He can't be this happy, joking, laughing character all the time. Pippin can. Pippin, yes, he's going into terrible places, but he can retain this love of life. He can show this love of life right until very close to the end. And you see that probably more than anywhere else. When he arrives in Minas Tirith, Tolkien uses this as an opportunity to show how other people react to him. And it comes across in lots of different ways. Denethor himself, who we know is not perhaps the most sympathetic of characters, he kind of likes Pippin. There's something in him that it's almost as if he can see that simplicity, he can see that love and care and courage in him, and that touches something deep inside him. Pippin, we're told, Tolkien, ever the linguist, does not address Denethor using the same kind of sort of bowing and scraping language that the courtiers in Minas Tirith did, because in the Shire they didn't have that kind of language, so he wasn't used to it. So he talked to him a lot more as if he was an equal, which Denethor should probably have disliked, but he actually found it quite endearing. And as I say, this is the linguist in Tolkien showing about a culture by the words and the language that they have. So Pippin is used to show that, and when he's in Fangorn, Treebeard clearly tunes into this. He's is very slow to trust people, Treebeard, but he trusts the hobbits quite quickly because Merry and Pippin they show that they fit right in with Middle Earth. They fit right in with nature. They enjoy it in a way that the Ents do as well. So I think that's what I would say thematically, and also the showing that character growth that we talked about a little bit earlier. Just having a quick flick through the chat. I think I had another question. Yeah, Martin S. What do you think going to Amman could do to soothe the pains Frodo or someone else having suffered similar trauma? Yeah, so Frodo gets a chance to go to the Undying Lands, and basically it's just a good place, and it's not just like this is a nice place to hang out. It's because everything around, it's the lands themselves that are undying rather than the person who was in there. So Frodo did die in the Undying Lands. He didn't live forever, but he was there in an unspoilt world that was different to the world that he had been in. Everywhere he went in, even in the Shire, had reminders of what he'd been through, and this really um, hurt him. He had twice a year would have pains as reminders of the great injuries he'd received. There were great healers there over in Valinor, so I think he would have had healing, physical healing. I think he would have had emotional healing. I think he would have had a chance to just be away from this place that has so many horrendous memories for him. So um, I think that's the answer. Is this wasn't about making him immortal. This was about putting him in a different and better environment. Question from Isaiah Kato. I don't actually. I didn't see a question attached to that one. But if you did have one, if you drop it in the chat, I'm sure one of the moderators will pick up on it. Matthew Stewart asking, is the Shire or the Hobbits mentioned in those early draft pages of Tolkien's Fourth Age sequel? No, this is all based in Gondor, effectively. So they're not there. Dan Ferguson's saying that I think personally, from a writer's perspective, Tolkien wanted to have children's interactions with his different characters. That's why hobbits are so important to have in most parts of the book. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but it's more the innocence that he enjoyed interacting with other parts of his story. I think that showing and there is an innocence in the hobbits. They gain experience going through all of this, but there is still an innocence, a hope that cannot be easily quenched. And I think that he did enjoy seeing that. You see the same when I was talking about Pippin and Denethor in Minas Tirith. You see a very similar thing happening in Rohan. Theoden really seems to engage well with Merry. They seem to get on very well, and that's one of the things that Tolkien definitely, I would agree with this, is that he definitely wanted to show people in a different light by putting a hobbit in their sphere and then seeing how they react against it. Stephanie Frederick, thank you very much for picking up from this is the Isaiah Cato question. Why was nobody from Rohan sent to the Council of Elrond? Good question. So the Council of Elrond was not an invitation event, is the first thing to say. This was one of those things where people just all turned up at the same time, and Tolkien does this a lot in his stories. It feels like happenstance, but too much of happenstance, too much of a good thing, a Tolkienian coincidence, that it was exactly right that we had these representatives of all these different people in Rivendell at the same time to discuss what to do with the ring. So you get Legolas, who was there, who was sent to admit that the elves in Mirkwood they'd been asked to keep hold of Gollum, but he'd escaped. Gimli was there with some other dwarves to say, hey, just so you know, Sauron sent an emissary to us looking for another ring. You might want to be aware of what's going on with that. Boromir was there because Faramir, and then he had this vision, seek for the sword that was broken. That vision seems to have come from the Valar, so that does seem to have been very much pushing for that to be happening. Then you get the hobbits, who are obviously there. Gandalf and Aragorn basically got them there, encouraged them to go there. Why not somebody from Rohan? Well, they had representatives from humans already, and at the time, if you remember, Rohan itself was under the control of Grima, and they were not in the right place to be doing stuff. Grima was trying to make Rohan basically be at war with itself and be looking the other way so that Saruman could then come in and take over. That was the cunning plan. Rohan, therefore, was not the right place to be sending people from. Mark Shees is saying that there were no flyers. Party at Elrond's, great food, council, and world-changing decisions. I mean, I would have gone for that. That sounds very good. Let's do a question from Luna saying, unlike in the film, Merry and Pippin really have to argue to become the eighth and ninth members of the Fellowship. Do you think they understood how dangerous it would be? After the pursuit of the Black Riders, they can't have been totally naive about the potential dangers. Although we really do see Pippin continually outgrow his naivety throughout the story. Also, do you think there was an element of foresight in Gandalf's advocacy for them? The passage is really a point where Elrond and Gandalf's judgments diverge. Elrond foresees trouble in the Shire but relents. Could this be the hand of Eru or fate nudging events? Well, yes, I think that's all really valid points. Merry and Pippin say early on, we know this is going to be dangerous, but we want to go anyway. But then when Elrond comes in, Gandalf says this. It says, it is true that if these hobbits actually understood the danger, they would not dare to go, but they would still wish to go, or wish that they dared, and be shamed and unhappy. I think, Elrond, that in this matter it would be well to trust rather to their friendship than to great wisdom. So that's the argument that Gandalf puts. And although, yes, there's a disagreement here between Elrond and Gandalf, it's not a big disagreement. It doesn't go on for a long time. It's literally over in a couple of pages. Elrond says, okay, so I've picked 7 members of the Fellowship, and I think I will go and see if I can find 2 elves from Rivendell who can go with them. And Gandalf says, yeah, these guys should go. Elrond replies by saying, I was thinking probably we should send them back to the Shire to tell them that there's bad things coming, at least Pippin. But then Gandalf comes out with that line, and that's pretty much it. And Gandalf basically says, even if you send Glorfindel, he's not going to be able to sneak into Mordor. So what are we actually doing here? We're not sending our best fighters. We're sending people who do the sneaky work. And what's going to be better is the friendship than the wisdom. So that's the feel of what's going on there. It was a disagreement. It wasn't a long disagreement. And my take is that Elrond's wisdom comes not from him always knowing from early on what the right answer is on everything, but when the right answer becomes apparent, he goes, yeah, that's it. What I mean by that is he gives this little speech after Frodo has said, I'll take the ring. Then Elrond gives this little speech that basically saying, yes, of course, you should. I think the hour of the Shire folk is upon us, and who among the wise could have foreseen it? And he's basically saying, I didn't think this beforehand, but now I see it. Now it's almost as if he can see this fuzzy way forward. Go, okay, yes, that's right. And I think this is the same with Merry and Pippin, is that he wasn't thinking that Merry and Pippin should be going. That wasn't his plan. He was thinking maybe he'd send a couple of his guys along as well. But when Gandalf just sort of says, you know what, friendship's going to be really important, that's the point everyone goes, and we sigh. So it's almost as if okay, fair enough. And then he says, then make it so. Suddenly he turns into Picard tonight, but you know what I mean. He says, okay, then it's a short disagreement, and I think this is actually showing us his wisdom, and it's also showing us how Gandalf himself operates, because Gandalf is not asserting anything. He's not saying this has to be. He's suggesting it, and Elrond sees the wisdom of it. Let's go to Martin S in the chat saying, "I've thought about Ingwe, High King of all elves. Was that title empty of governing power? I get the feeling he could rule the Vanyar, but not the other groups of elves. Maybe he was still head of state of Valinor elves." Yes. So it certainly appears. So there are the three main elf groups: Vanyar, the Noldor, Teleri, um, over in the ones that made their way over to Valinor. And yes, you could have Ingwe being the High King, but they were very much clearly in different places, physically in different places. The Vanyar were on the mount. The Teleri were on their own little island mostly, and the Noldor were hanging around the city of Tirion. So they were in different places and they had their own different leaders. So that's the I think that's the long and short of it, is that maybe he was the titular head of them all, but there were the three original leaders and each was the leader of their own people. Let's go to question from just to finish off at that one from Luna, actually. Elrond foreseeing trouble in the Shire but relents. Yes, this shows that Elrond can foresee certain things. Could this be the hand of Eru or fate nudging events? Yeah, I think so, but I think this is Gandalf seeing stuff. So it's not so much fate. I think this is Gandalf sort of sensing what is the right way, and then that nudging prompting Elrond to see the right way. Sine Jensen saying, we've done that one question already about the differences between the films and the books. Maura Lee, why did Pippin decide to enlist as a soldier in the army of Gondor and fight in the Battle of Morannon? So I think there are two bits here. Why did he decide to, first of all, to join up? That I think I've covered already. The fact that he seems to, after the incident with the Palantir, that's when it starts getting serious for him. And then he meets Denethor and he realizes, hey, this guy's son died for me. That's what seemed to be in his heart, making him join up in the first place. Why did he? But his original role then was basically to be hanging around Minas Tirith, helping out Denethor himself. He wasn't expected. Yes, he had a sword, but he wasn't expected to be there on the front line. The Battle of Morannon. This is the battle after the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, when Aragorn gathers together this ragtag army of whoever happens to be left afterwards, and then heads to Mordor. And they're heading there, it's worth saying, not thinking that they're going to go and win a battle. They're heading there to distract Sauron's attention from where they think Frodo and Sam are trying to get into Mordor at that time. So why did Pippin sign up? Because he could have hung around at Minas Tirith, but actually it didn't make much difference. If he could go to join the battle, if he could march on Mordor, then maybe that would make a difference and help a bit. We have to remember right from the very beginning, he started all this because he wanted to help his friend Frodo. At Rivendell, carried on because he wanted to help his friend Frodo. When at the breaking of the Fellowship, he and Pippin, he and Merry got caught by the orcs, it was because they were running around trying to find Frodo and help Frodo. This was the thing that drove him all the way through it. It's friendship. It's just pure, simple friendship. And what does a friend do in that situation? You can stay here in the place that's a safe and might be safer a little bit longer, or you can go and there's a small fraction of a chance you can actively help out your friend and save the world. And he chose that. So this is what was driving him. It's just friendship, I think. George, nope, here we go. Morally, another question saying Gandalf says in the story that the Pippin and Merry were brought to Fangorn, and their coming was like the falling of small stones that starts an avalanche in the mountains. How so? Well, this is a fantastic phrase that Gandalf uses, and he uses it when basically he comes back as Gandalf the White. He's lost a lot of his memory, but he's also missing a bit of the plot. And so Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli basically bring him back up to speed and say, we followed Merry and Pippin up to here, and they're in Fangorn Forest somewhere, and then Gandalf says, yes, this is where I come in because I saw them, and they are like the falling of small stones that starts an avalanche in the mountain. So basically what he's saying, these they are the small stones, that their actions and what they do will have huge ramifications because they arrive in Fangorn, and that prompts Treebeard and then the Ents to march on Isengard. That takes down Saruman. This is hugely important because the geopolitical element of this war was that you had Sauron in Mordor with his massive army, who was about to go and attack Minas Tirith. Rohan had a treaty, effectively, a long-standing military treaty with Gondor. Now, the moment that Gondor calls for aid, Rohan should respond. However, if Saruman was there attacking Rohan, Rohan would not be able to respond. And what would happen if Rohan did not respond? You don't get that amazing cavalry charge that came down and attacked the Sauron's forces in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Would that have changed that battle if that did not happen? Quite possibly, because they would not have charged down there, not destroyed all of those forces. Merry and Eowyn would not have been in that battle, so the Witch King would not have been destroyed, and perhaps Minas Tirith would have fallen. These are huge differences in what's happening. If Merry and Pippin hadn't gone to Fangorn, if they hadn't ended up in Fangorn, none of that would have happened. Saruman would have stayed powerful in Rohan and would have just carried on attacking, and Rohan would not have been able to help. So this is massive, and it's massive, a massive thing caused by just two small hobbits. So that is why they're the falling of small stones that starts an avalanche, because nobody saw it, nobody witnessed it, they didn't know. All they saw was the massive events which happened a little bit later. I can't pronounce your name in the chat, but saying, and Gandalf nudges Bilbo out the door, Merry and Pippin nudge Treebeard. Yeah, I think that's a really good good analogy there. Comparison. John Potts saying the weirdest thing about Merry and Pippin with the stones that started the avalanche was the fact that Saruman was felling trees. Did the Ents not notice? They did notice, and this is why, or some of them noticed. This is why Quickbeam, if you remember, so Treebeard calls the Entmoot and says, well, okay, Merry and Pippin, you can't be a part of this, but I've got a friend who will look after you for a while. This is Quickbeam. He's hasty. He's already decided that we should be attacking Saruman. And so Quickbeam, the Ent, looks after Merry and Pippin. And it turns out that the reason is that he's seen too many of his friends being killed by Saruman's forces. So he is aware. Some of the Ents are aware. But a lot of the Ents have just become very close to being trees. They're not been moving around. They become very sleepy and old, and so they need to be roused into action. Yeah, let's go to a question from George R.R. Tolkien, saying, salutations, Robert. Salutations to you too. So I hope you have a great week. You're having a great week so far. I just wanted to ask why Gandalf has zero patience for Pippin. It took to just rub him up wrong. So does he have zero patience? I think there are a couple of times when Gandalf gets a bit annoyed with Pippin. Uh, the first time is when they're standing outside the west gate of Moria, and Pippin just starts asking awkward questions. Why don't you know me and things like that. That I think actually is just Gandalf actually is a bit frustrated with himself because he'd not thought, oh, about the passwords, got to try and figure this one out. And so he gets a bit frustrated with Pippin because he's a bit frustrated with himself. And then secondly, the fool of a took moment when Pippin drops the pebble down the well, that genuinely is a thing that probably did deserve it. It was a silly thing to do. But I think the thing with Gandalf is that he doesn't get angry. He might get a bit frustrated, but I think that it's a kind-hearted frustration with the hobbits, particularly with Pippin. He sees the value that Pippin has. At no point does he say, right, with seriousness. Yeah, he does sort of like jest at it in a little bit of anger, but at no point does he seriously say, you know what, this Pippin guy is now endangering this mission. We need to send him home. He never goes there, which seems to imply that he accepts the bad of Pippin along with the good. And it's the small stones, and this is a thing I literally only just sort of made this connection when I was preparing for this video. The small stones that we were just talking about feels like an echo of that dropping a small stone down the well in Moria. This is just what Pippin does. That had a huge impact. Him doing that had a huge impact, dropping a small stone. And perhaps that's what is in Gandalf's mind when he's thinking, and now they are doing the same thing here, but rather than alerting the Balrog and all of the orcs that we're there, now they're alerting the Ents. So I think that there was deliberate echoing of language there. Let's go to NOscar, saying, when Elrond says something like, the small guys always have to carry the weight, he is speaking about the hobbits as a race that no one takes seriously. But now they carry such a huge burden. And of all the hobbits, Pippin seems the least mighty. And yet, after messing up again and again, in the last battle, he overcomes all fear and brings down a troll. While Frodo does the epic stuff and Sam is the guy most people see as the hero, Pippin seems to show the most remarkable growth. Frodo, well, he's pushed by destiny. Sam is loyalty incarnate, but Pippin actually grows a lot during the story. Do you agree? I do. And so I think I've covered a lot of that already, but I think that you really captured that very well. I think the next time I do one of these Lord of the Rings characters ones, I will probably look at Merry, because he's the one who sometimes gets a little bit missed out because the other hobbits have got very clear roles. We know what Frodo's role is, we know what Sam's role is, we know what Pippin's role is. What role, other than doing the big and impressive thing with the Witch King, what's his thematic role? So that's what we'll look at next time we do a Lord of the Rings one, I think. He's the least mighty to start with, but he ends up of the hobbits. But he ends up being the most mighty of the hobbits. Is the other noticeable thing I would probably say, and it is that character growth. Zhao one, I probably completely mispronounced that. I apologise. Welcome to the Members Club. Great to have you on board. Let's go to Luna. Another question from Luna saying, you've spoken previously about how important Bilbo's Tookish Street was to the events of the Hobbit. Do you think Pippin being a pure Took is what makes him such an effective catalyst for events, or are there other factors at play? Well, yeah, that definitely is a huge factor in this, and Tolkien doesn't lean on it too much, but the cooking thing is very important. When Gandalf, this is in Unfinished Tales, Gandalf talks about why he chose Bilbo. Yes, there was this kind of like insight and rightness of it all, but he was going for someone to go and have an adventure, and he deliberately started thinking, I want someone tookish, but not completely tookish. I want to balance that spirit of adventure that the Tooks have with the stolidness, was the word he used, of the Bagginses. And so that's where you get Bilbo, because his mother was a Took, his father was a Baggins, and the two of them just provided that kind of balance. The yes, this desire for adventure, inquisitiveness, but also the stability, which is what Bilbo brought. Pippin is trying to show a different side to this. Pippin is just the tookishness. He's there. He's his reaction. He meets the elves in early on, and his reaction is unlike Sam being, "I've never seen elves. Elves would be amazing to see elves." Pippin's like, "Oh, hey, great elves, love it." He's embracing this in a way that the others perhaps are not. So, is it tookishness? Tolkien definitely set that up as a thing, but I think he doesn't want us just to think of this as being this family are like that family are like that. I think he wants to show him in a separate light. Das Börse Fleisch saying, assuming Bilbo ages quickly in the books as well, did the ring's life prolonging effect wear off faster in Bilbo's case compared to other ring bearers? If yes, why? Yes, he does age quickly in the books. I mean, quickly is probably the wrong way of saying this. So, in the books, after he has the ring, then after he passes on the ring, then he starts to seemingly age more naturally. Is probably a better way of saying this. So at his leaving party, he was 11-1. He should have been a very old man, but he's giving Gandalf these speeches about feeling stretched like too little butter over too much toast, that kind of thing. When he hands this over, and then he makes his way to Rivendell, when we meet him at Rivendell, he's clearly an old man. He's there. He's got his little hobbies and things like that. He's not moving about all that much, and he's just like having naps a lot. And the elves there treat him like an old man. Now he's still alive, but it's almost as if he's slowly returning to a kind of a more natural aging. So if you look at Gollum as an example, Gollum had the ring for so long and it took over him so completely that we don't actually read of him as having aged so much in that period, over half a century, since he lost the ring. And he doesn't seem to have grown old in the way that Bilbo did. So there is a clear difference. The longer you have the ring, the more in its power overall it is. So it's not. I mean, I don't know. I'd say that it wore off with Bilbo. It's just that it didn't have long enough to take a full hold of him. Let's go to Callie Summers saying, hi, Robert. Apologies that a couple of these are fairly off topic, but it's been a while since the last Lord of the Rings stream. I had a few late questions. What was Pippin's standing in the Shire and for the Tooks as a clan in the broader region before the quest? So Pippin was a member of the aristocracy. He basically, his father was the Thane Paladin Took, and so he inherited that from him a few years after the adventures. So he is a member of the aristocracy in the Shire, but he's like the teenage member who can run around and do whatever he wants. And the Tooks are one of the venerable old families in the Shire. So what we really have, if you want to sort of like look at it through the lens that Tolkien was sort of writing it in, we have three members, three aristocrats, and one servant. That's the four hobbits we have. That doesn't come across in quite that way in the films. It has to be said, but it's very clear that you get these three um, very well brought up, rich hobbits and Sam. Then question was he capable of withstanding Sauron's gaze through the Palantir, or would Merry or Sam have held up as well? I don't think Pippin was uniquely able to withstand the gaze. The issue was, and Gandalf kind of makes this clear when talking to him afterwards, that this is about Sauron's arrogance, not Pippin's ability to withstand Sauron. What happened was that Sauron saw Pippin and he saw where Pippin was, and he suddenly made these assumptions. This is the hobbit that we've been hunting for. The ring is there. The ring is now therefore gone to Saruman. He's making all these assumptions. If Gandalf makes very clear, if Sauron had just had a little bit more humility and he just said, well, who are you? Just tell me everything you know, then Pippin would not have been able to withhold that information. It's because Sauron was arrogant and thought he could figure out exactly what was going on just at one glance. That was how Pippin managed to get away with it. How did Galadriel tempt Pippin? He's already a wealthy noble, heir to one of the most powerful families in the Shire, and he's not that ambitious anyway. Was it just the option of returning home? Well, we're not told how Galadriel. We read about a lot from Sam and Boromir, a little bit more about Frodo, but we're not told, although we're told that Galadriel effectively tempted each member of the Fellowship or tried to read their thoughts and minds. We're not told exactly what for each of them. Now, what would tempt Pippin? I think the assumption is that he could just go home. And I think that that's how he easily passed it, because in the same way that Sam could be tempted of giving up and going home, he just wouldn't, and it's the friendship which was driving Pippin. So I don't think it was ruling, I don't think it was power, I don't think it was money, I don't think it was any of those things. I think it was simply him not having to do this terrible journey. Maura, what was Pippin's role? Actually, I think this is I've reached the last question here from my patrons. So now is a good time to be dropping any more questions into the chat. I'll try and pick up as many of them as I can. Maura saying, what was Pippin's role in the Scouring of the Shire and afterwards? So this is a good one to round off with. So in the Scouring of the Shire, I talk about this as being how his character arc ends. Where he ends up at shows his character growth. When they come into the Shire, and basically there's over the bridge, over the Brandywine, there's just this blockade. But once they've managed to get in and past that, Pippin just goes, okay, I'm not having this. They learn that there's this mysterious character called Sharky in charge. They learn of all the terrible things that have been going on. And Pippin says, right, I'll meet you back here, guys. He heads off back home and rounds up 100 people, and he leads them back to basically to Hobbiton for the battle. he takes control of the situation. Merry does a similar thing. Frodo and Sam, although they've been our heroes all through this story, they largely take a back seat in this. And then off the back of this, Pippin is generally seen as a bit of sort of a hero in the Shire. He rides around quite regularly wearing his armor from Gondor, and everyone thinks, oh wow, what a very impressive man he is. He marries, and his first son he names Faramir, and then he is Thane for a long time before handing that over. He sets up the preparation of what was known as the Red Book of Westmarch, which is basically all of the stories and the lore that Tolkien, in his sort of little literary conceit, is that he has discovered all of these writings and he is just presenting them to us, and that is the Red Book of Westmarch. So Pippin, although he probably didn't write any of it, was responsible for setting that up on the basis of what Bilbo wrote, and then Frodo wrote a little bit more, and then a few more things on top of that. But once his wife had died, he was happy to pass on power. He and Merry then headed off and went to Rohan, and there they stayed until King Eomer died, and then when they died, both of them got buried next to King Aragorn. So that is his story. After the Lord of the Rings, he seems to have led a happy and contented life, and the three of them, Pippin, Merry, and Sam, basically ruled the Shire for the next half century, which is understandable because they had between them saved the Shire. Chaos Ballerina, why did Merry and Pippin not get to Valinor with Sam or Legolas and Gimli? Well, they weren't invited. So the Valinor is the land for which is made for those the elves, basically, those who are tied to Middle Earth, tied to Arda, the immortal people. So it was a special boon was given to the ring bearers. The ring bearers obviously being Bilbo and Frodo, and then Sam as well at the end, because Sam for a time did carry the One Ring himself. Gimli went with Legolas, and we're told that this was Legolas. Obviously, he had the sea calling from quite early on. He got it during the Lord of the Rings. Gimli went with him as the friend of the elves and also as Galadriel's champion. So basically, Galadriel gave him the invite to come, is what we're told. So that's why he's there. Merry and Pippin didn't. They weren't the ring bearers. They didn't have any personal invites. There were no ships going there anymore. So that wasn't really an option for them. So that's why they didn't go. Martin S. There seems to be two basic types of immortality. The pure one, ultimately powered by Eru for Ainur and elves, no adverse effects, and the unnatural type, Nazgul and Gollum. Bilbo being stretched was on a path to the latter. Yes, so much of what, first of all, Morgoth and then Sauron does is a mockery of what Eru has done. And this is Sauron trying to sort of extend lives by stretching them. And this is a mockery of the natural long lives of those who should have got them because Eru gave it to them. So, yes, this is in the same way that you get the orcs are a mockery of the elves, and then you also get the trolls are probably a mockery of the Ents, and so on. This is a sort of a mockery of that, but this is all about Sauron creating things based in Middle Earth itself, that he can then control. So it's the whole thing is twisted around. Curse Ballerina, picking up for Dr. Debunk, was the love of pipeweed as strong for Pippin and Merry in the books as it was in the films? Well, it's mentioned in the books, and certainly you get this this moment when after Isengard gets destroyed and it's underwater, they do discover Saruman's cache, and they do go in and indulge there. But I did a video on this if you're interested. For Tolkien, there's and I'm sorry to disappoint people, but there's very little evidence that this is anything other than tobacco in a fantasy setting. Tolkien loved smoking pipes, as we know, tobacco, so that seems to be what this is. So yeah, they did very much enjoy it, but it was not a driver of their story arcs in the way that it was for someone like Saruman, for example. Question from Zhao I do apologize. I'm probably always mispronouncing your name. Saying, don't you think Pippin got cheated by Tolkien? Sam takes on Shelob, Merry cripples the Witch King, Frodo fights Sauron, and all Pippin got was a half troll. No, I don't think so. Because I think in all of these things, Tolkien, he doesn't pretend that these hobbits are suddenly great fighters. I think a lot of the fantasy, the schlock fantasy, the standard fantasy that followed in the 70s and 80s did fall into this trap of being the sort of the hobbit equivalents, go from being nothings who don't know how to fight in some rural backwater to, by the end of the first book of a series, they're suddenly these great warriors capable of defeating the baddies. That's never a trap that Tolkien fell into with the hobbits. So Sam, yes, he defeats Shelob, but it's made clear he didn't kill Shelob. Secondly, he only did it because he had a magic sword. And then thirdly, and blinded her with a greater power. And then thirdly, this was because of Shelob's own weight. There's an echo for those who are sort of, I don't know if anyone's an Ungoliant fan, but for those who remember back the story of Ungoliant's end came because eventually she consumed herself because of her great hunger. And this is a bit like an echo with Shelob, who's the daughter of Ungoliant. Shelob attacks Sam, and it's the weight of Shelob that actually kills her, that impales her on that sword. It's not Sam doing anything impressive. It's just literally he's holding this sword and Shelob fell on it. So that's what was going on there. Merry, yes, he did impressive things, but again, with the Witch King, but again, we're told that this was all about the sword. This wasn't anything that Merry was doing. He just he jabbed the sword in the Witch King's leg, and that did the damage. So that was quite impressive. And Frodo, did he actually defeat Sauron? Ultimately, no. This was Gollum. So my take is that he never fell into this trap of making the hobbits great fighters. Similarly, even Pippin, when he's defeating that troll, it was more luck than skill. But he doesn't get. I think perhaps the point you're trying to make is that he doesn't get this amazing moment that everyone can look back on and say, "Wow, there he is." Who does? I think his amazing moment is the Scouring of the Shire. I think that's where it all builds up to. reflective rambling, picking up a question. Thank you. I love it when people do this from the nerd far away. I'd love to know either of these. Robert's favourite Hobbit or his favourite fantasy world. I mean, I've talked many times about Westeros, Middle Earth, and my feelings about the two of them. My favourite Hobbit is Sam, and I don't think that's ever going to go away. I think that he's on my very best days. I aspire to be Sam. He's the truest, the greatest of all of the Hobbits, in my humble opinion. Callie Summers saying Shelob's death never made sense. Sam still had to hold up the sword, right? Yeah. So the things to note on with Shelob is that Shelob did not die. Shelob scuttled away afterwards and licked her wounds, basically. But she got blinded by the file of Galadriel, which is basically the light of the Silmaril. So this light of pure goodness blinds Shelob. Then Shelob, not being able to really see what's going on, threw herself at Sam, and Sam was there with the sword, and Shelob came and just squashed it down. So that's what's going on. Yes, Sam didn't. The way I've always imagined it is that it's just it was braced against the ground. Tolkien doesn't actually write in the same level of details as some modern writers in terms of his combat. He goes over it relatively quickly, but that's how I've personally always imagined it. That's my headcanon anyway. Carl Karsnock saying Sam was a ring bearer too and gave it up more freely than anyone, really. Yeah, he did. He's great. But he had it a lot less time than everyone else, and I think we do need to respect that. Let's have a quick flick through. Do a few more questions from the chat. John Potts saying Merry had help taking down the Witch King. It's unclear exactly who makes the killing blow, but I'd say Eowyn did, though she wouldn't have the chance if Merry hadn't hamstrung him first. Yeah, so that one, if you break that down, we'll probably talk about this when we talk about Merry in a few weeks' time. But the clear implication seems to be Merry's sword was the magical sword. That was the thing which sort of ripped the Witch King's soul from this mortal realm, and then Eowyn is the one who actually killed him. So Merry's sword got rid of his invulnerability, and then Eowyn killed him. That's the sort of the breakdown. It's a bit more complicated than that, but that seems to be what it is. Remarks Magnus saying the impressive thing Sam did to take out Shelob was to be as brave as he could. Yes, absolutely. And Carl Karsnock saying the Iliad is great because it tells you where every sword or spear thrust enters and exits the victim's body. Yeah, so this is not Tolkien. I think for understandable personal reasons, didn't actually like focusing on war. He understood war was sometimes necessary and great heroism could happen in war, but that wasn't his focus of his writing. That's not what seemed to be a thing he liked to focus on. Okay, I think with that, I will start bringing this one to a close. I do want to say a couple of things very quickly. First of all, moderators, thank you so much. Secondly, patrons, thank you so much. But thirdly, don't forget my other channel, which I've just started releasing new content on, short form content. So if that kind of interests you, then do go check it out. IDG Live, there's a link down in the description. Just noticed I have got my head perfect here, so that I've got all of the lovely Pippin curls around it. Next week I should be back with another one from the Targaryen Kings series that I'm doing. We got up to Charis last time, so I think this next week we'll probably do Viserys. We'll have a look at him. So that's all for this time. Take care, everyone, and I will see you. Oh, don't forget, there'll be links appearing up here in a moment. I'll see you again soon.